Ready.
Okay, well, welcome everybody. The stalwarts are all here, it seems, and this is our last presentation for the spring of 2023. And our speaker today, Dottie Boatman, needs no introduction. Most of you know her quite well. She's been one of the first people to join this group and actually participated in renaming it from alternative energies to pathways to a sustainable planet. So Dottie's well known, and she likes to deal with the West, where she's originally from. And so I think she's going to talk a little bit about dams in the West as well as locally. So we're looking forward very much to this comparison and with local dams and those in the West. So Dottie, you have the floor. Looking forward to it.
Thank you. I'm going to ask my fellow members to be patient during some transitions when I attempt to share screen with different kinds of information. I've been practicing, but there may be field bubbles if you'll just wait with me when it happens. I will begin with a slide presentation about facts about dams, followed by multimedia presentations with 2 examples of dam removals. So I'm going to start the share screen process. First and foremost, we have to decide what is a dam and whether it should be removed. When I first spoke to Richard Steeves about a dam removal, I said I was just going to show up and said, blow them all up and then sign off. But I'm doing a little bit more than that. Much of the information that I got information from multiple sources, let's put it that way, and I have not prepared a credits slide sheet to acknowledge all of them. However, a lot of the information I got came from the River Alliance of Wisconsin and Trout Unlimited, and also the American River Alliance as well. First of all, we need to decide what is a dam, and the simplest definition I could find is that it is a structure that impounds or diverts water. So that includes a lot of different kinds of structures. I will be giving examples in the very end of my talk, probably the last third or so of the talk, about removing 4 smaller dams on the Baraboo River, which is unique in that it has undammed the longest stretch in the United States of 120 miles. And then I will be giving some information about the removal of dams on the Klamath River that are hydro dams, which will begin this summer and end next year, and will be the world's largest dam removal project. So this is kind of astonishing. You know, how many dams are there? Are there just a few? Apparently not. There are a lot of dams, as the next illustration will show. When you look at this map, you probably think that all of the green is some sort of topographical feature. It is not. Each one of them is a little tiny green spot, as shown in the legend here. And there is an official list of up to 90,000 dams. So that's an awful lot of structures. Who owns these structures? I thought that the federal government probably owned most of the dams, but although they are a significant owner of dams, they're not the largest. The majority of dams are in private ownership, listed here in green, and surprisingly, local governments control 20% of the dams. So why do we need dams? Well, these are the predominant benefits of dams in the United States. Our group is particularly interested in the production of hydroelectricity, but we can see that only 2 to 3% of all of the dams are for that purpose. Very importantly, in the Midwest are dams for flood control, and then particularly in the West, public water supply and irrigation, but the whopping majority of all of them are just for fun, for recreation. Returning again to hydropower, because our group is very interested in this, and unfortunately, because of all the coloration, it may be difficult to see. Not only do we have the various federal dams in orange, which are quite easy to see here, all of these turquoise spots are hydropower dams, as well as the navy blue spots here, and the also difficult to see purple spots. And the colors represent different owners of these hydro plants. Again, there are approximately 1,490 hydro plants in the US. A growing interest is in using or reusing non-powered dams and retrofitting them into potential power dams. This shows likely dams and their locations throughout the United States. So many dams could have the potential to become hydro dams if needed. Of the existing hydropower, who owns it? There are essentially 3 sectors: federal agencies, public ownership, and private ownership. The private ownership includes investor-owned utilities, independent power producers, and industrial companies, whereas the federal agencies are U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, very importantly, the Bureau of Reclamation, and the Tennessee Valley Authority, which is more prevalent on the East Coast. Whereas U.S. Army Corps of Engineers and Bureau of Reclamation factor very largely in the West. Now, there is a dichotomy between the ownership of hydropower and the capacity or the output. Well, we find that the majority of the plants, as shown, if I can get my mouse to work, over here, the majority are in private ownership, whereas they have limited capacity. Federal agencies have only a smaller number of plants, but they are much higher energy producing the majority of the energy. And for our group, we need to think of hydropower as coming in 3 different varieties: impoundment structures, diversion structures, and pumped storage. These hydro plants throughout the United States range in size from small systems that are suitable for a single home or village to large projects that produce electricity for utilities. Again, on the numbers of all of the 90,000 large dams, fewer than 2,300 produce power. So those are important pieces of information. Now, the impoundment hydro looks very much like what we expect a dam to look. We have the dam structure itself. We have a reservoir behind the dam. We have a spillway to release part of the water in a controlled fashion. We have, in more modern dams, we have fish ladders to help promote the return of fish upstream. And then finally, we have the power generating component with the turbines and generators. An important part of hydro is diversion hydro, and I had no idea, but Niagara Falls electricity is this kind of hydro, in that a sluiceway or channel is devised to remove part of the water so that it can then move through another channel downstream through the penstock into the powerhouse where the turbine and generators are located, and then the remaining water spills back into the riverway. Some of these diversion hydros don't actually require what we would consider a dam. And then a last type of hydro is not a dam structure at all, but involves pumped hydro, where we're using the kinetic energy of water to create the energy. So during the daylight, when the sun is shining here on solar panels, that energy is being used to pump water upstream or uphill into a reservoir. So that's what the power is doing. But at night, when the sun doesn't shine and they're on the solar panels, the water that has been raised uphill is now released, goes down a channel to the turbines and generators, and generates electricity during the night. Now back to dams, just in general, not necessarily dealing with hydro. There are basically 4 structural types of dams. The most common dam, of which 80% are called embankment dams. They're constructed from compacted soil, which is earthfill, or rock, which is rockfill, and have an impervious core. They're designed to transfer the entire water load downward. They are used to retain water across wide river valleys or for flood control, and typically they are shorter and wider than other types of dams. Here is a famous earth dam in the United States, which is also a hydro facility, by the way, at Oroville in California. And basically reminding ourselves that these embankment or earth dams are any dam constructed of excavated natural materials or of industrial waste materials. And there are several types: an earth dam, a hydraulic fill dam, and a rock fill dam.
Can you remind us why that was so famous? But didn't they have a spillway problem a few years ago?
I think it's famous simply because it is one of the larger dam structures. And I tried to pick dams, pictures that were in the United States and would be significant in the United States, because there are dams all across the world and there are lots of interesting pictures. And this is the reason I picked the Oroville Dam for this.
Thank you.
To illustrate the embankment type of dam.
Okay.
Another type of dam that is particularly important in canyons is an arch dam. It's constructed of concrete, and it is designed to transfer the water load to adjacent rock formations. It is constructed only in canyons that have a solid rock wall that is able to resist the pressures of the dam. Because the canyon walls bear the majority of the load, the arch dams are thinly constructed and require less material than other types of dams. This particular picture shows very nicely the arch of a dam, and I'm not sure which one this is, but I will show you one that is in the US news to date and famous. This is the Glen Canyon Dam impounding Lake Powell, and this is a famous arch dam. Another type of dam, which is not as common, is a buttress dam, which is constructed of reinforced concrete. It bears the water load downward and to the buttresses. They have a hollow gravity dam with a solid upstream face and a buttressed downstream face. The buttresses are supports that transmit the water force to a bedrock foundation. And here is a dam in Canada, which very clearly shows this buttressing. And we can see the downstream side is maintained by a series of buttresses. These dams have various types and names, which include flat slab, massive head buttress, Amberson dam, and multiple arch dam. And then our last category of dam is a gravity dam. It is constructed of concrete or stone masonry. It transfers the water load downward. It is typically found across narrow river valleys that have bedrock abutments and foundations. It retains water by utilizing the weight of the dam to resist the horizontal water load pushing against it. Each section of the dam is independently stable. And this is a pictorial representation of a well-known gravity dam. Hold on one second while a well-known gravity dam, just to show what they might look like. Other names for this type of dam include hollow gravity dam, crib dam, roller compacted concrete dam. So those are our structural types. And in terms of the frequency with which they're found, we again find that the earth or embankment type shown in the bottom, here's my pointer, the bottom bar are definitely the most predominant type, with the arch dams and the buttress dams being much less frequent. And again, because we're interested in hydropower, this is just to illustrate the distribution of dams. Whereas 80% of the dams are embankment, only about 3% of dams are hydro dams. And I'm afraid that I've created a slightly misleading figure because some of the hydro dams in the 2 to 3% are actually embankment dams. But here you get at least a picture of what's going on. And returning again to the purposes of these dams, a large amount of the dams are for recreation, over a third of it. Flood control is a second very important feature. Water supply, particularly in the West, for drinking and for irrigation are very important, with hydroelectric being a small amount, and surprisingly, a very little amount is set aside to benefit fish and wildlife ponds. So we've discussed what dams might be used for and why they're useful, but they have many disadvantages, and here is a list of at least 11 of them. First and foremost, dams can displace large numbers of people and disrupt their culture, lifestyle, and diet. This is particularly important for indigenous people across the world and for people who have limited political clout and means. And in some ways, the building of large dams in places like Africa, China, and on the West Coast of the United States have been a bit of a type of cultural genocide for the indigenous populations. Second important thing is that the dams can bury sites of great scenic beauty, which is what happened with the Glen Canyon Dam, or cultural significance, if we think of the Aswan Dam in Egypt. But even locally on the West Coast, many villages and places of cultural significance to the tribes have been buried by dams. The third reason that there are disadvantages, and this one surprised me, is that dams can lead to producing higher greenhouse gas emissions from rotting organic matter in the reservoir. And another important thing is by dams creating unfavorable environmental conditions in the streams that are downstream from the dam, blue-green algae can form and they produce methane. So those are all go contrary to our thinking of dams being useful for generating green energy and green electricity, is they can also be bad actors on the global warming gases. Obviously, putting a big structure like a dam in place is going to disrupt the local ecosystems. Another thing that is not immediately obvious is that the dams are going to trap sediment. This is also a problem for the dams because after a while, the sediments can totally clog up the reservoir basin and reduce the amount of water held. But another important thing is that the river sediments themselves are beneficial as a food source and as a source of logs and debris for habitat, and this is blocked by dams. And then, as we all know, that dams that are poorly constructed or poorly maintained can create a flooding risk if they experience a failure. Dams can have an adverse impact on the groundwater table. Number 8, the construction of a dam is a costly investment. This is often the thing that is most talked about up front when there's discussion about whether or not to create a dam, is the high amount of expense involved. Another issue is that many dams occur on borders, whether these happen within, like, the United States, where we have the Colorado River and its various dams going through multiple states throughout the country and also impacting Mexico. These can happen between countries and provinces and can create diplomatic and treaty problems by creating the dams. Another issues are the dams can make the water too shallow for navigation, which is not something we think too much about in the United States. And lastly, the reservoirs can be difficult and expensive to maintain. So cost is a big issue for dams. So this is a pictogram that illustrates the differences between a free-flowing river at dynamic equilibrium and a dammed river. Up here, we see with these various particles of various kinds of debris, which can be food, it can be toxins, it can be logs. They're freely moving, and we see that the water is fairly uniformly aerated, and we see a free movement of fish and probably and other biological organisms that are able to move upstream. And again, there is a natural regulation of temperature. But after a dam, we can see the dam here. We see that the water begins to be stratified into an upper layer and a lower layer. The lower layer is often oxygen deprived. And we also often find a great deal of heating of the waters behind the dam. We also find that we now have a blockade for the movement of the fish, and that the waters downstream may be higher than they were previously as a result of the dam structure. So not only do we reduce the function, the water quality, etc., we increase pollution, stratification, temperature, and algal blooms. We lose the natural transport processes of sediments, nutrients, and debris. Fish and other aquatic organism passage is also lost, as is the self-sustaining nature of the ecosystem. There are 4 ways that dams damage rivers. They block rivers, they slow rivers, they alter the habitat, and they impact the water quality. The dams prevent fish migration. This also limits their access to spawning habitat, their food resources, and to safety niches that prevent predation. The dams are often a particular difficulty because they have been sited in the rapids parts of river, which are the most important for fish resources. And we think that putting in fish passage structures will solve this problem, but it really only allows some fish to pass around the dam. And depending on the rivers and the number of dams the fish have to cross, can affect their effectiveness. So they're not a panacea. The rivers are slowed by the dams as well. Most aquatic organisms, including the important salmon and river herring, depend on the steady flow to guide them. The stagnant reservoir pools disorient the migrating fish and can significantly increase the duration of their migration. Very importantly, dams also alter the timing of flows. Some hydropower dams withhold and then release water to generate power for peak demand periods. So these can be quite abrupt cycles, even though the average flow may be maintained as an average. The huge spikes of withholding power and then rapidly releasing it have tremendous effects on the ecosystem. Additionally, the irregular releases destroy the natural seasonal flow that triggers growth and reproduction in many species. So it confuses the species that have evolved for a different kind of flow pattern. The dams alter the habitat as well. They can trap sediment and bury the rock beds where the fish span. Important components of the habitat, which are logs, gravel, and food, can become trapped behind the dam, and then they are not able to maintain complex habitats such as riffles and pools downstream. Additionally, dams that divert the water for power and other uses often remove water needed for healthy in-stream ecosystems. These peaking power operations can cause dramatic changes in reservoir water levels. This can result in stretches below dams that are completely dewatered. The dams impact the water quality. There are two things that can happen. Usually, the slow-moving or still reservoirs heat up, which result in abnormal temperature fluctuations that affect species. This can lead to algal blooms and decreased oxygen levels. Other dams decrease the temperature because they release cooled, oxygen-deprived water from the reservoir bottoms. So is dam removal or the concept of removing dams new? Not at all. This map shows a list of all the US dams that have been removed since 1912 to the present time. And I didn't count them up, but we can see that there are many, many thousands of dams that have already been removed. So this comes from a handbook from the various river alliances about how to go about removing a dam. And they said, think small. Although there are up to 90,000 dams, as we have seen on some of the pictorials, that are large enough to be listed in databases, there are additional dams that are not shown. Estimates are that there are 2 million small dams that are lower than 25 feet in height. A lot of these are in the Midwest and East Coast, and the majority of US dams especially in the Midwest and East Coast, are small. There are various reasons to remove these small dams. Number one, they're old. Most dams are over 150 years, but the life expectancy for an average dam is 50 years. So many of these dams are up for decisions about whether to repair them or to remove them. Most are not used for their original purpose, so the economic factors which would have made it easy to repair them and to cover the costs are no longer there. Also, by being smaller, it is easier to estimate what things will cost and what the economic environmental benefits will be of removal versus repair. And very importantly, a fourth reason is that by being smaller in scale, fewer people are involved to deal with, fewer stakeholders to get on board, to convince and give approval. Because this is often the step that takes the longest time in any dam removal. Once the owner is convinced, convincing the communities and stakeholders that dams need to be removed is often a difficult process. These organizations also say that there are 4 major categories of concern in dam removal. First is environmental. Ask questions. How would the river benefit from the dam removal? Would the plants, animals, and fish benefit from removal? And very importantly, would unwanted species be able to move up or down the river after dam removal? Think about zebra mussels in this category. Again, would water quality benefit from dam removal? We think that that would be automatically yes, but apparently that could change. Very importantly for the stakeholders is economic. Would dam removal reduce the local revenues from recreation or other uses? Just think about what happened when Lake Delton very rapidly had its dam breached and was lost. It threatened a $3 billion industry based around the dam, and it was very quickly restored and rebuilt. But other dams, we have to consider what would happen to lost revenues.
Not interested. Take me off your list.
And then one has to decide what is the best economic decision, both short and long term. Who would benefit from the restored lands? Would the owners benefit at all? Would it just be the users? How would property values be affected? These are all very important things before a dam would be approved. Then one that comes to mind, which is often the first reason that there's even a consideration of removing a dam, are safety issues. How safe is the dam structure? Will it be more cost effective to repair it or to remove it? What kind of measures would be needed to improve the environment if it is going to be repaired? And have we estimated and those need to be included in the repair estimate. And then all around dams, a lot of people have grown up with dams. They're used to the pond-like structures or the lake structures that have been created by the dams. And a lot of people feel that their recreation would be severely affected. So we need to look to see what role the dam plays in the local community. We need to think about what the area will look like after it's removed. Will removal of the dam improve communities and lead to revitalization? And could the dam removal actually increase recreational opportunities rather than losing them? For some reason, I am not moving forward. Oops. I'm not quite certain why we are frozen up for a minute. Oh, well, I'm trying to figure out what's happening with the failure to advance my slideshow. I'll read a message by Alan to everyone. It says, by coincidence, I am now reading David McCullough's 1968 book, The Johnston Flood. The dam failed in 1889. It was originally built to supply water for navigation, but was obsolete shortly after completion due to the arrival of railroads. Later, it became a recreational lake owned by wealthy industrialists. It had been in place and off and on maintained, mostly off over decades. When high water weakened the earthen dam, leading to catastrophic failure. Again, I'm going to have to temporarily leave the slideshow and re-enter it.
Okay, I think that's been great so far, Dottie. You've really covered it extraordinarily well. When I last talked on the subject about 15 years ago, I only focused on hydroelectric dams, and you've really broadened the subject, made us realize that hydroelectric dams are a tiny part of the whole broad problem. And it's been fascinating, a lot of very useful information. So we'll sit tight while you.
I am, hopefully we are back.
Okay.
Are you seeing this, the screen now?
Yes. Yeah, but just your slides.
Yes, this is the slides.
Right.
For some reason, the PowerPoint failed. It simply would not advance it anymore under the way I was doing it. So again, these various groups that are producing the handbook on how to remove a dam, they came up with 4 major steps that occur after you gain the public, stakeholder, and owner approval. Again, the longest part of process of removing a dam can be gaining the public, stakeholder, and owner approval. And that will be illustrated in the multimedia materials that I'll be providing next. The most important process that they have identified is the key aspect of pre-planning of the removal and the restoration process. They believe that no steps should be taken for removal until the funding and teams are locked in place for restoration. And then obviously, once you've decided to remove the dam, you have to actually remove the water, and you have to remove the structure, and then you have to have remediation. Sorry. The next thing I'm going to present is Running Free, which is the Baraboo River restoration story, and it focuses on the removal of the 4 final dams in the Baraboo area. And I think this occurred around the year 2001, which included the Waterworks City Dam, the Oak Street Dam, the Laval Dam, and the Linen Mill Dam. And at this point, I am going to shift to a different presentation. And I'm going to show you the film, which is about 15 minutes in length. And it is slowly loading, and I'm not quite sure why it's so slow.
About 420,000, which is the Wisconsin River just flowed.
We had a little bit of volume there for a minute, Dottie.
That's Use the sound.
No video yet.
The native people. The rap. So oftentimes in the dam grown up. It was a bit of a what is it? Friends.
Conservation Service Technician Dean Steinman. I heard of Dean from Dean, who was the dams were gone. That had never crossed my mind. Possibility, a remote possibility. Retired from here in the city. Because the city
Still no video. Are you getting video?
Oh,
Just getting fragments of sound and no video.
Partly because this is where the rapids are in the Bearable River. This is where
that's
the
better.
ideal
Got it.
fish habitat
sorry
is.
about that. It froze up or
The
something.
city-owned one was not producing any electricity, so it was just an obstruction in the river. We called people and talked to them one-on-one, started putting articles in the paper, things like that, anything we could get out there to kind of teach people what it would be like or why this would be an improvement in the river. The community was real concerned about the impacts on the river. We heard the ducks are going to all leave the river. We heard the fish are all going to wash downstream. The river's going to dry up. All kinds of various theories about what would happen when the dams were removed. None of those came true, but there was the resistance. The City Water Commission was the lead on, because they actually had ownership of the dam. The City Council had to make the decision after the commission. That was pretty much the organizations that were involved. DNR, of course, the River Alliance. After that dam was removed, then the involvement really grew. That's when Sand County Foundation got involved, when the Fish and Wildlife Federation, just a long list of partners who could see, that this was a good thing and there were benefits to be had.
In Wisconsin, we still have a law on the books that says if it is determined that the dam is not safe, the owner has two choices. They can either repair it, or they need to find somebody else who will undertake the operation, or there needs to be move forward to remove it. You can't just let it sit in disrepair. But certainly the cost to repair the dam was 2 to 3 times what it would cost to remove it.
The concern about safety with low-head dams is widespread, and the first and foremost has to do with the hydraulics of water over the top carrying a person or people, with them even a boat. 2 women in separate incidents died in the summer of 2001, shortly before the final dam was removed. And bitterly, and unfortunately, and regrettably, they died where the final dam was.
Dam removal in Wisconsin continues to be a big issue, and frequently for the same reasons that originally sparked the conversation in Baraboo. That is that you've got a old, obsolete, uneconomical dam. In some cases, you have an owner that doesn't have the wherewithal to fix it. In some cases, there's no owner. It's abandoned entirely, and it's in disrepair.
The money to pay for the removal of the dams was a fraction overall of what it would have been like to keep them up. Where did the money come from? In part from the owner. Certainly the city of Baraboo put some of its money in. The Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service had funds, had matching funds available in some cases. The National Fish and Wildlife Foundation played an enormous role in funding the removal of these dams and the proper rehabilitation, shall we say, of the dam locations. Water quality improvement often follows dam removal, not necessarily immediately, but generally within 1, 2, 3 months, which is pretty quick. When dams are removed, one of the most noticeable environmental improvements is the fish return. The fish community diversifying to what it had been prior to the dams being there. Secondly, the availability of different parts of the habitat to support not just fish, but a wide range of other biota.
The dams had basically displaced habitats because they're typically constructed where there's fast current for energy production. And those tend to be some of the best habitats in a river system. There were 10 species of fish that lived only downstream of the Linden Mills Dam. Once the dams were removed, they quickly moved upstream, and so you've got a more diverse fishery and a more stable ecosystem, which results in a more sustainable fishery in general. The types of habitat that was affected by the dam should have been colonized by a different type of fish, and now we're seeing those fish, such as very environmentally sensitive darters, which are in the perch family, for instance, a lot of minnow species, walleyes and bass, and hopefully we're going to see sturgeon migrate up through this river as well.
The DNR had done a fishery study 18 months after the removal of the first waterworks dam. Before the dam was removed, there were 11 species of fish found in that impoundment. 18 months after that dam came out, there were 24 species. Before the dam came out, there were 3 smallmouth bass in that impoundment. After the 18 months after the dam came out, there were 87 smallmouth bass shocked in that impoundment area. I either walk the dog or paddle the river every day, basically. And every day I'm on that walk or paddling. There are fishers on the river nowadays. Before the dams were removed, the only time you saw fishing people on the river were kids fishing for carp, just because they couldn't get anywhere else to fish for species that were worth keeping. I think it's exciting, all the revitalization efforts that have happened. I mean, Citizens for Waterfront Revitalization was formed about a year after the first dam came out to purposely look at revitalizing the river corridor and expanding the use of it. The Riverwalk is now over 6 miles long. It's got the pedestrian bridge. There's the distillery that's been built. There's a new apartment complex going up. A lot of those things that we thought would happen fairly quickly after revitalization of the river have taken longer because of the economy and whatever factors. But you're seeing it now, and you're seeing it significantly.
We decided that we, as a civic group, we didn't need to have money in our coffers. So what could we do for the community that would give everybody an opportunity to use this? So that's how we came up with our Baraboo River Walk project. It gets a lot of use. Lots of runners, I see bikers, just groups of people walking their dogs. It's a great asset to the community. I'm just very happy that the dams were removed. I know that there was a lot of resistance to that, but I think overall, because of what we were able to do with the Riverwalk, it's a great asset for our area. And we have a beautiful city, we have a beautiful area, so it all came together very nicely.
The Baraboo River dam removals, which freed up the main stem, is an international example of success for several reasons. One is the collaborative partnership, unlike nearly any other dam removal enterprise you can find. Secondly, the embedding of science into it. The researchers who studied the sediments on the Baraboo and the fisheries researchers established a body of work that is of significance around the planet for dam removal.
The Baraboo River restoration is really, to this day, pointed to as an example of how to do dam removal and the benefits to a local community. It is certainly one of the longest stretches of river unobstructed by dams restored in the history of the United States. But how this was done is still something that's studied, talked about, pointed to in terms of river restoration.
People can't believe it's 20 years later, but then when you look back at all that's been accomplished over those 20 years and how changed it is, it's really remarkable.
And then hearing the rapids again for the first time since the late 1830s, we can hear what those early settlers and what the Ho-Chunk and what the mound builders all heard through this area, the rapids of the Baraboo River. Now the resurgence of kayaking and canoeing has just brought a whole different life to the Baraboo River.
One of the first places in the United States that had electricity was Baraboo. It powered the lighting in Baraboo. So that's significant, and you have to honor that, and you have to, respect that. At the same time, it's really important to drive home to people the huge benefits with river restoration. There's so many very complicated, difficult issues relative to water and habitat restoration. Removing a dam, it's really simple. You do it right, the river gets better. It's a fact. But getting people to appreciate that, I have yet to experience a community where 5 years after the removal, if you went back and asked people what they think about it, that they didn't say, yeah, I was not in favor of this at the time, but looks pretty good now. Yeah, I'm okay with that.
It's going.
I'm going to stop share at this point, share a new screen. Things are moving slowly here on the for some reason, the PowerPoint is not, here we go. I'm now going to turn our attention away from these smaller streams to larger streams not to larger streams, to larger dams being removed. There are 4 hydro dams on the Klamath River that are slated for removal beginning this year. They are in Northern California and Southern Oregon. These will be the largest dam removals in the world to date. They're being removed due to pressure from native tribes and local fishermen due to the decimation of salmon populations. And also because they now provide only a small amount of hydro, and the amount of hydro they produce does not balance the cost to upgrade them with fish ladders and environmental improvements. I intend, because I really could not summarize this wonderful article, I intend to read the article and I will share that with you. And then I will play a single clip about the growing movement for dam removal by Built World. So I am going to shift. Oops. I'm going to stop sharing for a moment. And now I'm going to share screen again. Actually, I need to find my position here. Sorry, I need to exit full screen. I'm finding what I need here. Oops. Here we go. Okay, I am now going to read an article. Okay. Sorry about that. I told you that it probably was going to be a little bit awkward. I'm now going to attempt to share screen again. This is an article by a man named Jonathan Shipley that describes the situation along the Klamath River about the various tribes and the process of dealing with issues about the dam. For thousands of years, the Yurok, a tribe, have gathered along the Klamath River in Northern California to honor the life-affirming runs of wild salmon. But these days, their annual festivals have come to feel more like funerals than celebrations. I am increasing the volume. There are so few salmon in these waters that the Yurok tribe has had to resort to importing them from Alaska. Our economic, social, cultural, and mental health are dependent upon the Klamath salmon runs, said Amy Cordalis, Yurok tribal member, and the tribe's general counsel. When the river and salmon are unhealthy, we are unhealthy. Nearby on the coast, the ocean air in Crescent City, California, is no longer pungent with the smell of working fisheries. In the last 40 years, the quaint seaside town has seen a 96% loss in fisheries. A little further north, Brookings, Oregon has also witnessed the loss of almost all of their fisheries. There just aren't enough salmon to keep them running. Further out in the Pacific, by the California-Oregon border, where the Klamath River spills out, salmon boat fishermen are waiting and waiting. There is so little to catch that the salmon harvesters barely pay for the gas it takes for the boats to get out onto these cold waters. The reasons for the decimation of the salmon runs are many, climate change among them. But the biggest culprit, actually, the four biggest culprits, are the decrepit hydroelectric dams on the Klamath River. The first was built more than a century ago. They've become so obsolete, four are finally slated to come down as early as 2023 after decades of legal wrangling. The deconstruction will be the largest dam removal project in U.S. history. Will there be any fish left to save by the time the dams come down? We sure as hell hope. It's not too late, said Glenn Spain, the Northwest Regional Director for the Pacific Coast Federation of Fishermen's Association. Spain has been involved in the Klamath River Dam removal project for years. He has seen the consequence of the dams firsthand and knows what needs to be done. People work hard to feed others, he said. Their entire livelihood depends on these salmon runs. He's eager to solidify a years-long plan after the dams come down to restore the Klamath habitat. We need the political will to do it, and then we need to do it. We all need to work together. Richard Whitman, director of the Oregon Department of Environmental Quality, agrees. The fish runs are in terrible shape. Reestablishing the runs is important, and dam removal is just the first step. The Klamath River was once the third highest producing salmon run in the United States. Before the dams, there were approximately 860,000 salmon that swam the river. Today, it's down to approximately 42,000. The first dam was built in 1918 without much thought for the ecological or cultural implications. That dam and the three subsequent dams provided energy to the area for generations, but they're no longer profitable, nor do they provide the energy they once did. The relicensing of the dams and upgrades needed to meet current requirements cost far more than the profits made from the energy generated. This is to say, it costs more for the Pacific Core Company to keep them up than to tear them down. Pacific Core had filed a notion of intent with the Federal Energy Regulation Commission, otherwise known as FERC, back in 2002 to relicense the Klamath Hydroelectric Project. Hydroelectric projects are required to be relicensed every 50 years through the Federal Power Act. With the renewal process afoot, governmental agencies, tribes, nonprofit organizations, conservationists, fisheries, and others had the opportunity to evaluate the pluses and minuses of the four dams. There were many minuses. Could the dams generate enough electricity to make it worthwhile and at the same time be environmentally friendly with appropriate upgrades? The resounding answer was no. Dams had a negative impact on fish and water quality, and the four dams produced a total of only 82 megawatts of power. Just one modern hydroelectric dam produces approximately 1,000 megawatts. One wind turbine creates 7 megawatts. A dozen wind turbines would produce more power than all four dams combined. By 2010, Pacific Core agreed that the dams should be removed, and all signs point toward demolition in 2023. But things are dire. What the dams have wrought, climate change has amplified. Droughts have further reduced the salmon. Forest fires, too. The warming waters in the reservoirs are creating algal blooms and parasite growth, destroying what healthy populations remain. Infectious diseases in these waters are now rampant. Some estimates put the number of infected fish at over 90% with a high mortality rate. Further, at least 137 animal species are impacted by the life of the salmon. Otters, eagles, bears, and more are dependent on the rich food source. Orca whales out in the Pacific are also dependent on the salmon. Always teetering on the endangered species list, there are only about 2,500 orca whales left in the Pacific Ocean. As animals are dependent on the salmon, so are the people who call the area home, notably the indigenous nations that have lived in the Klamath River Basin for millennia. The Yurok, Kuruk, Hupa, Shasta, and Klamath tribes have lived, worked, played, and died along the banks of the Klamath for thousands of years, though the Yuroks are one of the few that were never truly removed from their ancestral lands in California. Sammy Joe Dilfatorum, cultural preservationist and member of the Shasta Nation, knows this all too well. Before the dams were built, the Shasta had villages there, but they were expelled from their land in California and removed to Oregon. Their villages were destroyed. My ancestors came from those villages, she said. They are buried there, my people. Salmon are part of the Shasta people's lifestyle and culture. It has been traditionally their main source of food as well. We are fish people, Difantorum said, and still are. But those fish are scarce and only getting scarcer. Our way of life, it's gone. Difantorum has mixed feelings about the land after the dams are gone. The old villages, ceremonial sites, and grave sites will be exposed again. Currently, the Shasta have to ask permission to even visit their ceremonial sites. We would like to recapture what we have lost, she says. The losses have been staggering. The fish are all but gone. The tribes dependent on the fish have been decimated. The fishing towns on the coast have fisheries with cobwebs in their rafters. The fishermen on the reservoirs, rivers, and oceans are hauling in almost nothing. Most everyone is eager for the dam to come down as quickly as possible. It will be helped by President Joe Biden's recently signed Infrastructure Act. Congress has allocated $160 million for restoration of the Klamath River Basin. To have a free-flowing river again, said Whitman, will benefit everyone. This would please Spain. To recover and restore these damaged watersheds is a matter of people's livelihoods. As for Difantorum, she said that what she looks forward to are having ceremonies again. It gives me hope. So that is a story about the people. And then I have a final clip, which I hope to share, which I have to again find, that it talks about the new movement to replace large hydroelectric dams. So I'm going to start screen share again. And I have to actually open the window.
Someone who wants to
Okay, I'm coming back.
Impressive structures ever built by humans are dams. Typically concrete or earthen structures, dams block entire river channels, controlling the flow of water in order to generate electricity, aid irrigation for farming, control flooding, and assist with ship navigation. In the United States, dams have dramatically altered the landscape, turning entire river systems into mechanized systems of controlled lakes. And in the process, the dams have turned deserts into productive farmland and provided clean, cheap electricity for a growing population. But in recent decades, concerns about the profound negative effects of dams have grown. and a movement calling for their removal is getting ever louder. This is Built World, a channel about architecture, urban design, and infrastructure. And today, we're talking about dams and the increasing calls for their removal. The Columbia and Snake River watershed in the Pacific Northwest provides a useful case study on both the benefits and environmental impacts of dams. There are 18 major dams on this river system. Together, the dams on the Columbia and Snake Rivers have transformed the Pacific Northwest with the electricity, irrigation, and flood control they provide. But at the same time, these dams have been devastating to the region's environment, and particularly for one of its most critical components, salmon. Salmon have historically migrated from the Pacific Ocean into watersheds all over the Northwest, via the Columbia, Snake, and thousands of smaller rivers. Scientists often refer to rivers as the circulatory system of the landscape, moving sediments downriver and nutrients upriver. And much of this nutrient flow depends on the migration of salmon, but the construction of dams disrupted this natural flow. Before white settlement, it's estimated 10 to 16 million salmon returned to the Columbia River annually to spawn. Today, that number is estimated to be around 1 million, and a major cause of this reduction is dams. The dams block the fish in their tracks, turning a once free-flowing river system into a tightly controlled and engineered machine. Environmental regulations now require dam operators to mitigate their negative effects on fish. This comes in the form of fish ladders, or building things like fish hatcheries, and even loading young salmon into trucks to bypass the dams. But these measures are expensive and produce little tangible results for the cost. Increasingly, however, calls to remove dams and return rivers to their natural state are growing. In the past 2 decades, hundreds of dams have been removed in the United States. And many of these projects have been driven by economics as well as environmental reasons. Primarily, removal projects have been focused around small, aging dams, where the potential liability of failure or the cost to maintain or upgrade obsolete technology outweigh the profits that can be made from their electricity. But 2 recent projects have changed the conversation around dam removal. Both the Condit and Elwha River dam removals in the early 2010s were the largest and most ambitious ever attempted in the US. In the case of the Condit Dam, environmental regulations required the dam's owner to install a fish ladder in order to renew the dam's operating license. But it was shown that the costs of this upgrade were greater than the revenues the company could generate on the dam's electricity. It was decided that the dam would be intentionally breached, allowing the White Salmon River to flow once again unimpeded. Shortly thereafter, the removal of the Elwha and Glines Canyon dams surpassed Condit in both complexity and scale. Nearby tribes like the Elwha Klallam had long pushed for the removal of the 2 dams on the Elwha River in Washington's Olympic Peninsula, in order to restore salmon runs in a landscape they've inhabited for thousands of years. With the backing of environmental groups like the Sierra Club, the federal government approved the demolition of the dams in 1992. But years of pushback and then years of planning delayed the project's start until 2011. The dams were slowly demolished over a 2-year period, a technique known as notch and release, so as not to release all the sediment that had built up behind the dams in a single explosive event. Simultaneously, restoration efforts backed by the National Park Service have been ongoing to restore the dam sites and rewild the Elwha into something resembling its pre-dam state. Proponents of dam removal continue to think bigger. A project on the Klamath River in Oregon and California has recently won full approval to move forward. The $500 million project will involve the removal of the J.C. Boyle, Copco 1, Copco 2, and Iron Gate dams on the river. Expected to begin in 2024, it would surpass Elwha as the largest ever attempted in the U.S. These 3 projects have pushed the envelope for the scope and complexity of dam removal, and have made massive strides toward re-establishing the ecological richness of the region. But still, the juggernaut dams on the Columbia and Snake River remain. For years, numerous proposals have been floated to remove 4 major dams on the Snake River. The Lower Granite, Little Goose, Lower Monumental, and Ice Harbor dams have been identified as candidates for removal because of their high costs to maintain, relatively low power output, and impacts on salmon. Yet opposition is fierce from farmers and utility customers who benefit from the dams. In 2020, a $33 billion package was proposed that would include removing these 4 dams by dismantling the earthen berms that are adjacent to the concrete dam structures. But the package would also establish an agency consisting of state and tribal leaders to manage salmon, as well as set aside funds for infrastructure that can replace the electrical generation, transportation, and irrigation benefits the dams provide. In late 2022, a federal report also recommended the project, but it still faces a long uphill battle. When it comes to dam removal, one important consideration is that dams are one of the largest sources of carbon-free electricity. So despite the environmental benefits that dam removal may bring, the electricity they provide still must be replaced, which is why to many, the concept of dam removal, especially for behemoth, major power-producing dams, is still almost unthinkable. But what's been proven with these smaller dam removal projects is that in cases where energy production is negligible, the benefits of their removal are clear. Like many 20th century projects that helped build the United States, dams have provided both widespread benefits and negative unintended consequences. But the growing slate of successful dam removal projects perhaps shows a new way forward, an opportunity to radically transform the landscape by deconstructing human interventions and allowing rivers, salmon, and the landscape around us all to be unimpeded once again.
So we are back. Thank you all for staying with me. And I felt that these clips said more than I could myself. So I'm hoping that it was okay for you to watch them and that the sound quality was acceptable. I see that there are some chats. I've been trying to look at them throughout. Let's see what the comments are. The very last statement is from Lou Harnish, who says that the Baraboo Dam seems very small, and yet it had considerable effect on the river ecology. And he says that new dam designs should solve some of these issues. There's a message from Alan, who did a quick Google search for solar-powered pumped hydro and found a number of interesting responses. One of which claimed that 35,000 sites have been identified where solar and existing dams and reservoir locations could be used for this technology and replace the need for battery storage. So I think that's very interesting. And then I think I read the comment from Alan to everybody about the Johnston flood. Lee wanted to know, in what ways do dams affect groundwater? And I successfully sort of glided over that, because although I did read in one instance specifically how the Glen Canyon Dam affected the water work, the groundwater, I really didn't want to go into it and couldn't understand it that well, but I could probably email that particular article, if I can find it again, to Lee, and she can look at it, because it has something to do with the pressure and the hydraulics in the ground. But I can't answer that question.
Any other comments, questions out there? You can unmute yourself one at a time if you'd like. I have a couple of questions or one, but I'm going to hold off and let others come in here.
I'm going to
This is
try
Steve.
and,
Can you hear me? This is Steve Shellen.
Yep.
yes, Steve, I can hear you. Oh, there you are. Where are you? There you are. I see your picture now. Yes. Hi, Steve.
I came in late, but I think I got to the important part here. There is a series on the Columbia River removals, which is very telling that the species of fish has been decimated from hundreds down to single digits in the breeding areas, because there are several dam locations upriver where the flow is backwater, very slow or almost stagnant, and the fish just can't make it. So it's very telling about that relationship to the ocean population, which has also suffered the same loss. So for those cases, they should have kept the nuclear power plants that were planned for the Northwest, instead of offsetting that by saying we have a lot of hydroelectric.
Yep.
It was a very false thing. And the Trojan nuclear power plant in Oregon was completely removed as almost a brand new power plant. It really did not even get to be a major source because of political opposition, and it was a big mistake. I'll end there.
Okay. Any more questions or comments?
Yeah, I would, this is Don Reeder. I would
Hi,
like to
Don.
understand the effect of climate change involving flood risk in the Midwest. And how is that factored in to dam removal and so on? I think it should be important, but it has to be costly and engineered.
So far, the dams, which I was looking at, were not involved in flood control, because that is certainly a major issue in having a dam and keeping it in place. Are there other alternatives to dams that will help prevent floods? And apparently there are some, like improving the estuaries, improving the buffer islands, just a variety of different things, which I'm not going into. So obviously, flood control is a very major concern in deciding whether or not to keep dams. And a lot of the smaller dams, of which the River Alliance was kind of pushing for looking at those, have very little to do with flood control. So it won't be an issue for all dams. It will certainly be an issue for some dams. And apparently one of the nature organizations, I think it was the Sand County Association, didn't want to get involved with dam removal because they wanted to do things that could be duplicated multiple times. And they felt that dam removal was a sort of case-by-case basis. And that is largely true, although there are some general principles that can be derived. Each dam has to be considered individually in terms of the benefits that it provides and who's going to pay for it and those sorts of things. So yes, flood control is a real biggie, and no one is going to want to remove dams that have a significant role in flood control. Are there any other?
I have a comment that I'd
Yes.
like to make. I despair the politicians who think that we have all the energy we need, when we need to think a little bit into the future and recognize the so-called low-hanging fruit of transportation. And the other one, of course, is having sufficient electricity to drive heat pumps. And just to get rid of the methane, we're going to be using a lot more electricity in the future. And at the same time, to start even contemplating removing the Bonneville Power Authority to me, is tragic thinking. And I hope that doesn't go very far. The other stuff that you talked about, those were fine. Plymouth I could handle, Baraboo, but not Bonneville. I think that's way over the top.
Well, I think that what's being shown is that there are other ways possibly to generate electricity, and most of the dams that are being removed that have some hydropower are providing very little. You saw the example, the 4 dams that are being involved in the Klamath, while they once were a really good source of hydropower, they're now less effective than a very small wind farm.
That's true, but again, how the wind is intermittent, the hydro is not, and that's still. And you're quoting the capacity factor, not the actual production and consumption of energy from those wind farms. So,
let's say that those wind farms, instead of needing 7 towers, I forget what you call the instruments, the each pylon, instead of needing 7, let's say they only have 30% capacity. So let's say we had 20 of them to replace 4 dams that are creating huge ecological damage.
Yeah.
They're actually committing cultural genocide. There are a lot of things. A lot of this is old technology, and we have new ways of doing the same jobs that are perhaps less environmentally damaging. So the idea is that we need to reconsider, not that we're going to take out the blanket plan to remove all of the dams. That's really not it. We're going to have to be selective. There's also the issue about powering up non-power dams. I think I showed you those figures, that there are thousands of potential sites for existing dams that might be smaller, in places that are less ecologically sensitive, that could be retrofitted to produce hydropower. So I don't think that we're going to be running out of hydropower. That's all sand out.
Well, if I could address Richard's concern with the Bonneville Dam, nuclear power in that region was scheduled to completely take over the power needs of the river.
Yeah.
And I mean, every plant has its day in the sun, and then winter comes and it's replaced by something else.
Yeah.
You certainly can't just shut down a dam or just blow it up. As the last video showed, over a period of years, the dam that was displayed there was gradually lowering the water level, taking pieces of the dam out, and their justification, or their one of their reasons for doing that was the silt behind the dam. If they just blew up the dam, would just devastate the downriver with the flood. And if you go across the world to Egypt, they have the huge dam that the Soviets helped put in the Nile River that is gradually filling up, and eventually it won't be holding water. It will be holding the dirt from the lakes in middle and southern Africa, and they'll have to figure out how to get rid of all that fertile soil that was not gradually move to the delta of Egypt, and the dam will not be producing power anymore because it will be full of silt.
Yeah.
And my plug is that you can build a nuclear power plant there on the Columbia River, or the 4 that were scheduled, moderate the water use, and create recycled ponds or lakes off the river flow, get more concentrated power, and have the restored ecology. Because the fish don't spawn in the ponds or lakes behind the dams. They spawn in the most shallow upstream portions of the river, which, you know, are not useful to us in any way except ecology and sport fishing or whatever. And if you saw that, which I did about a year ago, saw the series on the Bonneville Dam and upstream possibilities for restoring the salmon runs and the number of salmons, I think you'd agree that this is a many decade long plan that needs to be implemented to restore the food supply as well as better control of the water.
Yes. Could I ask Steve, what program was this on? Do you remember? Was it a PBS special?
It was a PBS program.
So I might be able to find that. So I'll certainly look it up because it sounds very interesting.
I would encourage anybody to look at that and then decide whether you want concentrated power that runs 24/7 or something that you have to manage the whole environment around it. If instead of 3 windmills you need 20 windmills, what's that going to do to the bird population?
Sure.
Yeah. There's no source of energy that doesn't come along with its ups and downs, the good and the bad.
Right.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying nuclear power is the solution for everything, but it's got some obvious uses that are very well suited for it. And some places it's just not possible. It needs cooling water too.
Yeah.
I see a couple of comments also from Doug Edwards. He states there may be alternatives to remove accumulated silt from behind the dams. I don't know whether he wants to expand on that. Doug, do you want to unmute yourself and talk? I don't hear from Doug.
I was trying to avoid that.
Oh, okay. Okay. And then you said that rivers often run out of sufficient flow during the latter parts of the summer. That's true. I think we're also going to be looking at one of the things that I came across and thought I might talk about, but felt it would be, diverting too much time, was the situation due to the water shortage, the long-term water shortage in California. Obviously, we had all these recent floods and everything, but they have not mitigated all the long-term effects of the water shortages along the Colorado River. And there is growing evidence that there is not room to have both, there's not enough hydropower that can be generated from both the Hoover Dam and the Glen Canyon Dam. And there is concerns about whether they should bypass the Glen Canyon Dam or otherwise do something with it. So these issues are coming up because hydropower is becoming less efficient due to other environmental considerations. So we can't necessarily rely on them indefinitely. I think that we should not be planning in the United States to build a lot of big hydro. I'm perfectly fine with the idea of recommissioning some of the non-powered dams to make them hydropower rather than putting in new structures. So I think that we have to keep an open mind about these things, and there's not going to be one size fits all. And I had not really, when I thought of dam removal, I was always thinking big dams. And it wasn't until I did this talk that I realized how many small dams there are. A lot of them aren't really doing anything except clogging the rivers, and that they're the low-hanging fruit, and probably for conservation purposes in general, except for extreme cases like all the salmon are being ruined, we can't really ignore that. But for quality of life issues, particularly in the Midwest and on the East Coast, we can easily focus in on these smaller, less controversial non-power dams.
Yeah, I think it was you did a great job, Dottie, because we haven't covered hydroelectricity for a long time, and this broadened the picture to the relative role of hydroelectricity in dams. And you pointed out that the percentage of dams that are generating electricity in this country, I think, is somewhere around 1 or 2%. So
it's up to 3, as much as 3%.
So this, we've been overlooking, in the interest of thinking about hydroelectricity, we've been overlooking a big problem in just the quality of our rivers, and it was very interesting. I especially liked the story of the Baraboo River. I thought that's close to us. Many of us have passed over it on our way to the circus in Baraboo or further north to the Crane Foundation, and we haven't really had a good look at it the way we did with these interesting, I presume those were drone images, but with excellent comments from various politicians and wildlife management people. It was an excellent video. I really enjoyed that. And the one on the Klamath was also interesting. So you really broadened the field of our understanding very much. And thank you, Dottie, very much.
Well, to me, the enlightening thing, and I sort of knew it, but what positioning dams, especially large dams, can do to the people who were living in the area, who often have very little say as to what happens, their property rights. And it's, some might say, well, on the West Coast, well, it's just fish, but actually it's a whole culture that depends on the fish. And what happened with a lot of the native tribes on the West Coast was that they moved from consuming maybe 400 pounds of fish or more. I'm a little vague on the numbers per year, down to maybe having as much as 8 pounds of fish in a year. And they moved from a diet that was probably very much a paleo diet, but high in polyunsaturated, in omega fatty acids, to a Western style diet with refined foods, sugars, a very poor quality diet. And that we didn't see diabetes in these tribes, prior to the 20th century. And now it is a very significant health concern. So I think that we really need to consider the human beings as well as how much electricity or whatever we might be getting.
Very good point. Agree.
If I could interject one other thing, you all may be familiar with the Kickapoo River,
Yeah.
which had been planned to be dammed up. They bought up the farms, they cleared the area, they were at the point of wanting to start that. I happen to remember it because as a scoutmaster, I had taken a group of scouts to canoe the Kickapoo River, and we were about halfway down it when a big rainstorm came. Upstream, we had no rain when we were canoeing, but that evening the river rose in our area 9 feet. We had a fairly large group, and we camped in 2 areas. One was kind of upstream from us. The latter people had put in their canoes, and they found a good stream that came in. They pulled over, went up kind of the hill there at the juncture and camped, and the rest of us went to a bridge across the river. You could stand in your canoe and reach up and touch the bottom of the bridge.
Wow.
We pulled all our canoes up the hill and camped next to that bridge. This area had all been cleared of habitats, so the road that went over that bridge, had been blocked somewhere east of us. That rain came through overnight, since it was moving south, coming from Minnesota. And in the morning, the water was at the bottom of the bridge, and we had logs and things coming through. It turns out the company that had rented us our canoes had been going along the boundary and trying to find the people that they'd rented the canoes and get them out of danger.
That's a problem. There's a guy, some of you may know, he actually spoke to us in PLATO quite a few years ago. Black was his last name. I forget his first name was Scott. It wasn't Scott, Stephen, something start with an S. But anyway, he was quite instrumental as an environmental experienced politician.
It was
Spencer
Black.
Spencer Black.
Spencer, that's the Spencer, yeah. And he strongly encouraged, he was a lake consultant, and strongly encouraged them not to build the dam because he felt that the benefits were mild at best in terms of flood control, and the risks and problems of significant function were low. And so that dam was never built. There are earthen remains where they started to think about building the dam in the area, but that was never finished. And they have now a very good recreation area for wintertime skiing and summertime canoeing in the area. And it's considered one of the benefits of forward thinking by politicians not to put in a dam where the indications were weak in the first place. And it's been a successful, at least it's viewed now as a successful decision.
Well, we have 15,000 lakes, you folks from Minnesota. We have 15,000 lakes, and we have 84,000 miles of river.
Yeah.
So this affects every spot in the state. And just I came in. I had some calls this morning, but I came into the program, Dorothy, when you just put up the map of all of the dams in the U.S.
Yes.
And you could see that as population moved west, dams were the source of power. And then you got to the Mississippi and a little bit west of the Mississippi, and you could tell just the rainfall stopped, and dams didn't start till you got to the Pacific West Coast.
Right.
That was quite an informational map, just with that little amount of detail that you could draw from it.
Yes, thank you.
It's nice that these are being recorded so we can all go back and look at some of those slides. There's a wonderful collection of slides, very, very informative. So it'd be fun to look at them. I save some of them as they go along on my computer to go back and look at too. And they're quite interesting. Well, it is 11:45. if we don't have any burning questions, let me just say that I've enjoyed working with all of you and appreciate the input from most of you, both in helping to organize talks. Stephen, for example, giving us a chuckle up there, has offered to give us a talk this fall on assessing radiation risk. So all of you have been chipping in your way, and I appreciate it. Just wanted to let you know that I would be sending out an agenda for this fall. We have it now permanently organized, and just wanted you to know that we'll be starting a week later than usual on September the 25th. I expect to be traveling in mid-September, so thought it would be safe if we moved it back a week. But that'll still wrap things up by the end of November. So I'll be keeping in touch, try not to overload your emails, and in the meantime, but writing now and again, and look forward to any input from you. Be sure to keep up your membership in PLATO, and I hope you all have a great summer. And thanks again, Dottie, for a really good presentation.
Thank you.
I'd like to say something, Richard. I think that this course this organization has been absolutely outstanding and is incredibly made me realize how difficult we are and where the solutions are for development. And we have to make decisions, and you are useful in this regard and irreplaceable. So I congratulate you for the previous stuff, and I look forward to the future. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Don. Really appreciate that. I see a few thumbs up there. It's a mutual group of happy climate concerned individuals who try and keep positive in spite of some of the challenges that we have. And so thank you, Don, for your comments. Well, you all have a good rest of the day, and keep in mind that Earth Day was just a few days behind us, and we'll try and live up to the recommendations too of our former Governor Nelson, who it was Nelson, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
We started that all back in 1970 from Wisconsin, no less. So we have to appreciate that. I have a picture on my computer of a Earthrise taken from the moon in 1970 that started that whole motivated Governor Nelson and the public to listen to him back in 1970. It's a pale blue dot in the sky when looked at from a distance, and it's vulnerable, and we all need to keep minds of that. So have a good summer, everybody, and thanks again.
Thanks, Dottie, for a great presentation, and thanks, Richard, for a great semester.
Okay.
Thanks to Richard, and thank you for the compliments. Thank you, Lee.
Yes. Bye-bye.